Alright, so we're about to put on front and rear diff covers for the truck. It's getting Mag-Hytec for both front and rear. Benefits and reasons we're putting this on is because this is a fully serviceable diff cover. So you got a fill port at the top, an integrated dipstick, and at the bottom you got a drain plug, which the factory diff covers do not have. You have to pull the entire diff cover off to service that diff. You have a drain plug with a magnet on the bottom. So you can see any metal shavings that might be building up inside the diff. Same thing with the front. This rear one has an integrated gasket on it, or O-ring, excuse me, not a gasket. And then the front does not have that integrated O-ring. However, it does come with a gasket with lube lock on it. So you do not have to apply any RTB to these when installing them. Let's go ahead and start with the rear. I'm going to do them one at a time just in case I don't have enough fluid. I can complete at least one of them and then run the store, get more fluid if I need it, and then do the other one. Alright, so we're going to start by removing this rear diff cover here. You can identify which rear diff you have by the bolt pattern. So this particular 14.5-inch rear diff has a bolt at both the 6 and the 12 o'clock position. I've taken the fill plug out. That way I can kind of monitor how much fluid's left in there. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and loosen all the bolts all the way around this differential cover. And then at the bottom, I'm going to slowly back them out so that way the fluid can flow out of the bottom and into a drain catch pan. Alright, so we've slowed down to a slight dribble here. I'm going to go ahead and take off the rest of these bolts and slowly lift that cover off so that way we can remove the seal and clean that mating surface. If you guys aren't changing the diff cover out like we are, you can still use this factory diff cover. It just doesn't have the drain plug. You'll have to do what we just did every time you want to change the diff fluid. These factory diff covers from the factory will have this reusable gasket on them. Just make sure you inspect this gasket really well and make sure it doesn't need to be replaced. You do not want these diffs leaking. And then make sure you clean both mating surfaces really well. I recommend using brake clean with a gasket remover So the factory gasket, pictured here, is reusable. Just make sure you inspect it really well. Make sure it's still going to make a good seal. In the event you need to replace it. So if you need to replace the factory seal, you're going to want to go with this Mopar part number. I ordered this one off of Amazon just in case I needed it, which I do not. This is for the rear differential. All right, so just a quick recap of what we did. We went ahead and went all the way around that rear diff cover with the 13mm socket, loosened all those bolts, separated the seal from the rear axle so that way fluid could start to drain to our drip pan. Then from there, we completely removed the cover, cleaned the gasket surface. Remember, if you're not replacing it with an aftermarket diff cover, you need to clean both surfaces, the factory diff cover as well as the mating surface on the axle. Make sure you get that super clean. I use just brake clean and this gasket scraper. This is just a cheap Craftsman gasket scraper. I'll link it along with all these other tools. From there, we came in with our brand new Mag-Hytec diff cover. That one had a factory O-ring, but if not, you can reuse the factory gasket that comes on the truck if it looks good. Just make sure you inspect it really well, make sure there's no cracks or tears or anything like that that would cause a leak. And if there is, make sure you pick up a new one, which I'll also put that part number down in the description below. Once you do that, you're going to come back with your 6mm Allen key, and that's how you're going to tighten down those Mag-Hytec stainless steel bolts that come with your new diff cover. If not, you're doing factory, once again, you're going to use your 13mm socket. Deep socket, make sure you put back those factory bolts, and then just refill, top her off. Alright, so now that the diff cover is off, we're going to want to clean that mating surface. I'm going to use some brake clean with a gasket scraper. Just make sure it's super clean so we can get a good seal. So down there at the bottom, you can see a little bit of sediment. There's also some on top. That sediment fell in whenever we took the cover off. It was sitting on top of the rear axle. Can't really prevent that from happening. So what we're going to do is take some brake clean and a nice clean lint-free rag. Just wipe that out really well and make sure that nothing stays in that rear diff. Alright, so we got the mating surface cleaned off real well. We just used a gasket scraper. You want to be really careful with your gasket scraper and make sure you don't mar up the mating surface. So when you clean up this mating surface, you just want to use a little shop towel. Clean it up the best you can. Try to get it nice and flat. If it had the factory gasket on it, you shouldn't have any gasket residue left on there. Sometimes people will put back cheaper gaskets and they do stick to the surface. Those are hard to get off. This one, super easy, as long as it's factory, shouldn't be a big problem. Alright, so the really nice thing about this Mag-Hytec kit is you do not have to reuse factory bolts, which is good. Mag-Hytec throws you in brand new bolts. They actually throw you in 2 extras as well, along with washers. These are stainless steel hardware. You just have to make sure you torque them to the recommended torque spec of 12 to 16 foot-pounds. Reason being, these are known for stripping out really bad. So just make sure you stick to that torque spec. You can look all over the internet. You'll see multiple people who've said they've stripped them. You just want to make sure if you're going to strip them, you strip the top ones, not the bottom, so it doesn't leak. But don't strip them at all if you can help it. When you install these, you're going to take some black RTV, apply it to the threads before you insert them. This will help seal. You do not want to apply any RTV to the O-ring. And just as a little note, these O-rings are known to leak just a little bit until the truck goes through a few heat cycles. And this O-ring and the cover swell and contract, creating a better seal. Then you want to come back and torque these down if you can. One of the things you have to do to prep this is go ahead and take some gear oil and lube up this O-ring right here. I'm going to use some cheap Supertech. We're actually going in with AMSOIL 75W90 severe gear. This is really good stuff. We're going to run this in the front and the rear, but I'm going to use this cheap stuff to lube up the O-ring, so that way I'm not wasting that AMSOIL. Just going to stick my finger in here, get some on there, kind of apply it liberally to this O-ring, so that way she has some lubrication. Alright, so let's go ahead and get this on the truck and get after it. Alright, so we're going to take a little bit of RTV and apply it to the threads. Then we'll start with the 12 o'clock position. Just make sure to install this properly with the dipstick pointing up. Would not be good if you install it upside down, so that would be an absolute pain in the ass. Kind of defeat the purpose. Alright, so I'm going to line it up. Insert my first bolt up here at the top. Go ahead and take my extension with my 6mm Allen key. Try to start tightening this down a little bit. You don't want to tighten these without getting all of them in first. Alright, so now I got all of them threaded by hand. I'm going to go back, snug them up in a star pattern. This is where we go across from one another, kind of like you're doing lugs on a wheel. I just want to snug them up. Make sure that O-ring sets real even. Alright, so I got my short extension for my torque wrench. Torque wrench is set to 16 foot-pounds. I'm going to start up here at the top, just in case, for some reason, this strips out. It's on the top, and we can at least still get a good seal on the bottom. So right there with 16, we're still going to keep going in our star pattern. $16. Alright, so now that they're all torqued, I'm going to go back one more time, just make sure I hit all of them. Alright, so a couple of those need to be tightened back down again. So we're going to go check one more time, just to be sure.
Don't want this to leak. That would not be good. Alright, we are at 100% torque.
And look how good that looks. Looks great. Alright, so the only difference is if you're not going with an aftermarket rear diff cover, you're just going to put back in the factory bolts. You do not need to put RTV on the threads of the bolt because you're planning to remove them again. In addition, you still want to torque them down if you can. A lot of people do them by hand. I'll strip them out. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. But you should probably torque them down because it's really easy to strip out. So next step, we're going to take our pump. We're going to fill this with our AMS oil. We're going to try to use the dipstick and make sure that she is good to go. We're also going to go back and tighten the plugs where they have taps for temperature sensors and the bottom drain plug just to make sure there's no leaks. So let's talk about reading this dipstick. So this dipstick is knurled down here at the bottom to retain fluid. There's two lines marking the safe zone. So you want to get your fluid right in between those two lines. For me, it took 4 quarts just to get on the stick and then another 4 to get to the full point. When you read this dipstick, you want to stick it down the hole and go ahead and thread it down snug so that way you can get an accurate reading. Then you pull it back out, wipe it off, make sure everything looks good. There's a magnet down here at the point of this as well. That'll collect any metal shavings you have floating around in your oils. It holds about 1.5 to 2 quarts more than the factory rear differential cover would, so that's good. Keep it nice and cool. Also, another thing you want to do whenever you get ready to reinstall this, after filling your differential, you want to take some lube and run it around that O-ring right there, so that way it gets a good, nice seal at the top. But you just want to tighten this by hand. You don't want to over tighten it. So go ahead and take some of this lube, rub down these threads and this O-ring. We're going to go stick her in, make it happen. Alright, and there she is. Nice and pretty, fully installed and topped off. 8 quarts of fluid to top that thing off. That's about 1.5 quarts to 2 quarts more than the factory fill. So we used AMSOIL Severe Gear 75W90 for that rear diff. We're going to do the same thing for the front. However, I wasn't anticipating it taking 2 quarts of extra fluid. So I'm going to go pick up some more oil before we do the front diff, which is fine. We need to stop here anyway for our sisters who buy 2-wheel drive trucks and don't have to do their front diffs. So I'll be back with another video for the front differential after I get some more fluid. Thanks for joining us for another episode of All American Garage. Be sure to like and subscribe below.